Hi everyone and welcome along. Today we're going to paint some dragonflies and moths in a lovely folk art style. So grab your paints and let's get started. Some of you may be aware that I actually have a dragonfly and moth project in my second book, Birds, Bees and Blossoms. So if you're interested in learning a nice sort of detailed, realistic style of painting those insects and many more, we've got bees, we've got butterflies and all sorts of things, then have a look at my book Birds, Bees and Blossoms. You can get signed copies from my Etsy and my web shop. But today what I thought would be fun is to actually paint it in a slightly more sort of stylized folk art inspired style. So what I've got here is I've got a piece of paper that is 6 by 8 inches, and what I've done is I've done 3 lines down the middle which are going to help me draw the simple dragonfly and moth shapes. So we'll start at the top. We're going to pop a moth in here, and as I said, this is going to be quite stylized, quite kind of inspired by folk art, which goes for a much more expressive, kind of lyrical and symbolic feel. So I'm creating this sort of curved body, and we'll have a little sort of lump there for the head, and then from there I'm going to mark out the wings. Now it's always really easy to draw in one side and then really hard to draw in the other, but that's gone okay. If you want, you can always use a ruler to make sure you've got things in perfect symmetry, but that is not bad. And then we'll have a nice sort of scalloped shape there. As I said, the pencil lines for this are just very much guidance. So I'll pop in another moth at the bottom and then we'll get our dragonfly drawn in. So for the moth, I've also got a horizontal line across, which is going to help me mark in my wings, but I'll begin with a little oval shape for the head, and then for the body, like I said, remember this is not based on a proper anatomy, it's just more a nice sort of artistic interpretation. It's also a simplification, I think. So I'm going to now draw in a series of slightly shrinking sort of lumps. There we go. And then for the wings, I'm just going to twist it slightly, and I'm going to use that line for the first wing, and then just pop in the other one underneath. Okay, now we've got, I could just bring that down a little bit further. Now I've got the body shapes. I might want to pop in some antennae. And what I quite like about this piece is the idea is it's a little sort of piece of art. I'll have a few little legs and antennae. And then I'll bring those antennae down, I think, just to keep everything a bit sort of individual. Now, for those of you painting at home, what you should do now is rub out the pencil just lightly. And this is my kneadable eraser. It's like a putty rubber. And what it's brilliant at is just sort of lightly taking off the harshest pencil lines, which leaves you with a nice faint pencil. I won't rub out too much so that you can actually see it for filming, But yeah, rub your pencil right down so that you just see the faint lines, and that's going to make life a lot easier once you start painting and want to be able to get rid of pencil lines. So I've now started painting. Now what I'm doing is, first off, I thought about the colour palette I'm going to use, and I decided, with autumn being my theme, I wanted a range of sort of warm tones, like this sort of blush peachy pink I've got here, mixed in with sort of, ambers and gold kind of colours, and then to contrast that we'll have some grey, bluey, turquoisey colours contrasting. But the first thing we need to do is paint in translucent washes of the colours to build up the basic shapes, and then we're going to do some lovely layering over the top. So this colour I'm using at the moment is a mixture of permanent rose and yellow ochre, and it creates a beautiful blush colour. And what I'm doing is I'm making sure I'm painting in a section on each of the insects to keep a cohesion with a colour palette, so everything is going to look like it belongs together on the page. The other thing we need to be wary of is allowing these painted sections to dry before we go in to paint new sections. So I'm always going to be looking for sections that aren't touching other wet areas of paint. Well, at the moment the one I can see is this bit here and here. So I'm going to get some yellow ochre and dilute it right down, so I'm getting water from the jar, and I'm going to paint in this section. I'm using a size 2 pointed round brush. It's just about small enough to be precise enough, and then I'm actually going to continue on this colour down into the little orbs. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a bit of an ombre effect, and I'm going to get some burnt sienna, and I'm going to paint in a blend there. And then I'm going to move on to some alizarin crimson. So allow them to touch so you get a bit of a blend. So we're going to colour in all of the sections in basic translucent washes, and then we'll be adding detailed decoration on top. So that looks kind of fun. Let's have a look at some of these colours over here. So I've got Payne's Grey, but diluted right down, that looks rather lovely as a sort of a grey tone. And you can see these pink wings have dried now, so I can colour this in without the fear that the colours are going to bleed into one another. Because I think one of the things a lot of beginners with watercolour get a bit confused about is when we're talking about working with a very dilute colour, and yet, so that means obviously adding plenty of water, but then also not flooding the page with tons of water. So it's more about the fact that you've added quite a lot of water to the colour in your palette, but actually when you pick it up on the brush to put it onto the page, you're being quite sparing with the amount of liquid paint that you've got there, so that it can dry nice and quickly. We've got our shapes all coloured in. I used some cobalt turquoise as well as my extra colour, and I've also swapped out my big brushes for my small detailed ones. I've got a rigger, which is the long slender bristle brush, and then 2/10, 4/10, which is my tiniest brush, and a 0. All of these brushes, along with the rest of my Pro Art brushes are available to buy on my Etsy store and in my web shop. So let's go, shall we? You've got to make sure that the paint is 100% dry before starting your detail, and what we want is to have some concentrated versions of the colours we've been using. So I'm going to begin with some alizarin crimson, and I'm just going to have a bit of fun really, painting in some shapes on top of these washes. And I want to, I mean, these are not by any stretch of the imagination going to be like actual accurate moth patterns or anything. I want to celebrate nature, so I'm going to use flower and foliage shapes and patterns to create all the detail on these shapes. So one thing to consider is how intricate you'll go, because this might be a really nice therapeutic painting project that you can really take your time over, whereas some of you might be painting it for a quick card for someone, where you might want to just simplify your patterns down so you're not spending all day painting it. But I must say, a lot of the joy of watercolour comes from enjoying the process really and not rushing. So just remember that you're going to want to paint in a symmetrical style, so anything you've painted on one side you want to paint on the other side too, so you can see how using the concentrated colour contrasts really beautifully and shows up really nicely. So that was alizarin crimson, and now I'm going to use some concentrated Payne's grey, and I think I am going to actually sort of not fill in my shapes every time, so I'm just doing some simple leaf sprigs, and then we might have a slightly longer one that curves along following the line of the wing. This is what the 4/10 brush is absolutely brilliant for. Lots of control for detailed work. The rigger brush, this long one here, is fantastic for sort of long slender lines, so I'm sure we'll be using it at some point. But it just goes to show how diverse a medium watercolour can be, because you can get all sorts of effects, whether it's dilute washes and blends or really strong concentrated detail. I'm going to put another flower in here. And I've just got to be mindful that I'm not going to be able to do it quite as large as the other one because I've put in my leaves. So there is a little bit of planning that goes in. And of course you could just do a little series of marks and dots if you wanted. You could also, once these are dried, add in some more colour over the top. There's really, I don't want to sort of say there's one way of doing things at all. So for example, I think now what I'll do to fill in this hole is just do 3 little cobalt turquoise circles. So let's get creative and start to fill up our dragonfly and moths. When you are painting in the matching up side, what I've been doing is just mentally sort of seeing where that one is, coming across with my brush and then sort of marking it in. But it doesn't matter so much if you don't manage to get it exactly, because what I like about this piece is it is ultimately a hand done piece. It's not done by a machine, it's not completely perfect, it's done by a person, and it tells a story, and that's very much the ethos of the inspiration folk art. It's a storytelling piece that has a narrative, and ours is talking about the seasons, really, with autumn coming in. I mean, moths are, at least in my head anyway, more sort of accustomed to autumn. Dragonfly is a bit more spring, but then I quite like the idea of putting these two side by side. And actually Ant said, don't dragonflies eat moths? Well, I'll need to check that one. Anybody else know? So this could be actually quite a dangerous composition, putting all these guys together. Okay, that's looking rather lovely. And sometimes you might want to use a slightly bigger brush. When I say bigger, that's 2/10. It's still pretty teeny weeny. And I'm just going to paint in some cobalt turquoise. And then I can use that central line, the pencil line, which is very faint, but it is there, I can just about see it, as a guide. And I can always tidy that up, but it's funny, I'm not too worried about things being, yeah, like completely symmetrical and perfect. So that's our first creature all painted in. To be honest, it's funny, you could keep going if you wanted. You could sort of then add in a little shape from the side. It is all down to you, however much or little detail you put in, but I'm the kind of person who just keeps seeing gaps that I want to fill in. I just think it looks amazing the more intricate it is. But also what's great is the simplicity of the shapes that you can put in. You're literally dabbing your brush on the page and it looks cool. Some of my favourite bits of detail on pieces like these are when you actually look at the true detail. So for example, the veins on a dragonfly's wings, and you paint those in and then you turn them into lovely little artistic interpretations of leaves or berries or whatever. But I like how the root of the inspiration is from the actual insect itself. So I'm just using Payne's Grey and I'm just travelling along these stems, finding and matching up the leaves. And what's nice is, even though I know these aren't 100% symmetrical, I really don't think it matters, and I think that when you just look at it as a whole, the piece just works. So all my pattern has been painted in now, and I just thought it might be a really good opportunity for us to just take a look at all the different patterns so you can get a bit of inspiration, and to also say that if you haven't already, if you were to hit the like button or comment below to let me know how you're getting on with this piece, every little bit of interaction means a huge amount, because it shows that you're engaging with the channel, and that helps YouTube make us more visible, which is what we want, because we want as many people as possible to find us and enjoy watercolour. So now this is dry, I'm going to rub out any remaining pencil, and then let's see what we're left with. Before we go, a little tip from me on erasers and rubbers. So I was showing you this kneadable eraser, which is by Faber-Castell. I find this is brilliant for when we're doing the lightly rubbing out the pencil to just fade it a bit, but I find when I'm trying to actually rub out the pencil in its entirety after the painting is dry, just using any old white stationery rubber or eraser, I find just does a really good job, because you can just go for it. But that is my finding, that the kneadable art eraser is great for the fading of the pencil, and then getting a fairly bog standard one for the last little rub. Anyway, that is your autumnal moth and dragonfly folk art inspired watercolour. Thanks so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed that one. I want to say a huge thank you to my patrons for their support, because that support enables us to keep creating videos like these that everyone can enjoy. And if you enjoyed it, then hit the like button and comment below to let me know how you got on with that one. And of course, if you never want to miss another video, then hit the subscribe button and the little notification bell, and we'll see you again next time.